All right. Okay. I'm hungry. I hope you're hungry. Arashabase! See if I said that right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ISWUTT Podcast. My name is Michael Graham, and I'm going to be your host this evening on this succulent, sensational, sushi-filled episode of the ISWUTT Podcast. Now, before I get going into the topic, which I'm sure you've already guessed, yes, sushi, I want to go ahead and just shout this out there and say, go ahead and check out the ISWUTT Podcast on Instagram at ISWUTT Podcast. That's ISWUTT Podcast. Facebook.com/ISWUTT Podcast. Twitter at, you guessed it, ISWUTT Podcast, and Anchor.fm/ISWUTT. That's Anchor.fm/ISWUTT. You can show some love. You decided to give a little dono for the boys so that way I can continue to build out slowly but surely my setup so that way I can provide the best possible listening experience for you, the listener. Now, that all of that fun stuff is out of the way. I am so hungry right now. I have to admit, one of the things that I've noticed since I moved away from California, from the coast, the West Coast, to kind of the South, the middle of America, is there is a severe lack of high quality, delicious, good sushi to be had. And I really would say that since I moved to Nashville almost 2 years ago, I've been on the consistent hunt to try to find some really good and high quality sushi. And much to my everlasting dismay, I have not yet found that here. And there are some places that are pretty good. I'll give you that for being in Nashville, not necessarily a city that's known for its sushi. It's okay. But at the same time, the price tag that you're paying for just mid-tier sushi is not an ideal meal, I would say. In fact, one of the most recent times that I went back to California to visit my family, one of the very first things that I had done was go to one of my favorite local, very traditional sushi places. Shout out Light and Healthy Sushi, Newhall, California on Lyons Avenue. Fantastic, very traditional sushi. And it's, when I initially heard about sushi when I was much younger, I kind of thought, okay, well, it's almost like a fad food. You're hearing about it in kind of like the mid 90s when I was growing up. And I had kind of put it on the same level as like fondue that was big in the 70s. And if you're not familiar with fondue, it's basically you take skewers of different things and you kind of dip them in this sauce, whether it be like cheese sauce or chocolate sauce. And it's something that it kind of gained popularity very quickly, and then it died out very, very quickly, if not just as fast as it gained popularity. I thought that was sushi, because you would hear about sushi and, a new sushi place is opening up, and what is it? Oh, man, especially in my hometown, as the sushi joints started to become a little bit more regular within the city, I would be kind of like, no, I'm good. I'm not going to try this. I'm not really interested in the idea of eating. All I knew is it's raw fish, and it doesn't sound incredibly appetizing when you're a little kid and all you want is like pizza and mac and cheese and dino chicken nuggets, right? Not saying that I still don't love all of those things, but I think my tastes over the amount of time I've been alive have definitely opened up and broadened. And the first time I ever tried sushi, I remember very specifically, I was with a group of my buddies and we went to this place and we sit down, and what they would do is they had two different ways. Is they had a conveyor belt that was going around and you could just kind of pick plates off and you could try it here and there, or you could order directly with the sushi chef. And the way that they would bill you is at the very end of the night, you'd stack up all of your plates and they would go through and they would count all of the different plates and the different color of the plate. So for instance, a blue plate is going to be less expensive than a red plate, and it all depends on what it is you're ordering. So if you were to get a California roll, it's going to be cheaper than it would be as if you were to have a piece of salmon nigiri sushi. So then they would count everything up and then they would send you the bill at the very end. And I was just astounded at how very quickly me and a bunch of my friends, granted, we're all a bunch of big fat kids, in high school, we go in and we just saw the bill and we lost it because we didn't realize, when you're eating plate at a time, you're not really keeping tabs of your brain. You're just kind of going for it, trying to try all these different things. And we had to call our friend's dad to actually come down and pay for the tab because nobody had enough money. But when we were having that meal, there were really two different types of sushi that I wanted to try because I was new. I didn't want to go jump straight into the deep end and try some of the most gnarly things there. I wanted to kind of very slowly ease into it. So I didn't know that there's soy sauce and ginger and wasabi. That was all very literally and figuratively foreign to me. I had never tried this. So I tried initially just a California roll, which, it's a little cut roll, and you have avocado, some cucumbers, a little piece of cooked crab, and, rolled up with seaweed and with some of the rice, and you kind of go for it, and it's okay. But the other piece of sushi that I really wanted to try was unagi, which is a freshwater eel. And the only reason, and I don't even remember the name of the gentleman, he did a stand-up special, and I was watching his comedy, and he was saying, oh, unagi power. Unagi is what will give you rock hard for the ladies. So he's talking about this idea of unagi sushi, eel sushi being some level of aphrodisiac, and that was really the only thing that stuck out in my head. So naturally, I would order it with the guy, and I tried it, and it was pretty good. Now, granted, I didn't have any of those feels of aphrodisiacs or anything. It was just a meal. We were all full, and we ended up just going home, so it was all good. But those were the first two types of sushi that I really was ever introduced to. And then slowly but surely, not only the environment of being at the sushi bar with a lot of people being around, eating and drinking and having fun, and it's not a quiet meal. When people walk in, you have all of the sushi chefs that are behind the bar. They kind of all yell the same thing, and they say, "Arashamase," kind of welcome, please come in, come join us. And I really dug the atmosphere. So the more I would go back, the more adventurous I would get. Slowly but surely, I would try more and more and more things. And over the course of the last, I think I can safely say, about 20 years, I've been privy to trying all different types of sushi. So I kind of want to break down in my mind what I think of as kind of like the sushi hierarchy, where if you're brand new to sushi, and we'll talk about what is sushi in just a moment, but I kind of want to break it down and just say, look, if you're brand new, this is where I would suggest to start. I kind of have 4 different tiers. So you kind of have noob sushi, which you would have the California roll, which is what I mentioned. On this list, I put a spicy tuna cut roll because it's very basic. It's just spicy tuna with rice and your seaweed. Your basic deep fried rolls, because when you have a roll that's deep fried, it really takes a lot of the edge off, because I think the fact that it's hot and it's fried, it kind of takes away from some of the fishy, some of the more empowering, overpowering flavors and smells and all of that. Those are pretty easy to get by when you're new. The other one is a Philadelphia roll, which is just a small piece of salmon, and then you have cream cheese of all things wrapped in the seaweed, wrapped in rice, and those are pretty good. I mean, but that's a very basic way to get started. When you're trying those, you can get a little bit adventurous, put a little wasabi, maybe try some soy sauce, some ginger, see what that's all about. And I think once you're there and that's comfortable for you, you're enjoying yourself. There very possibly maybe some people that try those and say, you know what, this is just not for me. Whether it's the texture or the taste, I don't like it. I don't like seafood. In fact, I took a trip to Japan with a gentleman, one of my good friends, Danny. I hope he doesn't mind me calling him out by name here. No last names. But he had actually never tried sushi before, never really ate seafood. So while we were there, he actually tried a little piece of salmon. I don't think it was quite for him, because he obviously didn't sit there and say, oh, I love this, and scarf the whole meal. But he tried a little piece, and that's really what it's all about. It's about just trying a little bit at a time, getting a little bit more comfortable with it as you go. So now that we have those noob rolls, then I think we got to go with the mids. We got to go with the standard mids. And I think the standard mids, it's most of your cuts of fish on sushi, right? I think shrimp kind of falls into that as well, for the most part, because then you're starting to experience some of the different textures, some of the different flavors, some of the different sauces that they might put on there. So with that, I would probably put in salmon. I would probably put in albacore, crab, egg tamago, tuna, spicy tuna. Then you're really starting to get into the more fishy stuff. And I think once you're there and you're very confident, I think that's when you probably want to take the next step. And for me, it took me a long time to go up to the octopus and the squid. Those were the two things that for some reason they just didn't necessarily really look appealing, so I didn't want to venture that far. So I kind of left it at that. I think that's when you're kind of starting to get more advanced. When you get into the squid, the taco, which is octopus, and then you have, of course, something that I've never tried but I've always desired. It's called fugu, which is puffer fish, which is, if it's not prepared properly, can actually poison you and kill you. So in Japan, if you actually are going to be trying fugu, you have to go to these stalls that are licensed. The people that are actually working there have to pass a test and get a certification in order to properly cut the fish up. And they cut it up into these very fine, very thin slices, and they kind of put it around the plate, and it almost looks like it's a white fish. But then it's so thinly cut when you pick it up and you actually look, and I've seen so many videos about this, pick it up with your chopsticks, it's almost translucent. You can almost see somebody through it if you held it up to your eye. So I think that's like the advanced level. And then I had to put one here because I didn't really know. I think these are a step farther. So I put, this is the Giga Sushi. If you consider yourself like the Chad of sushi fans, if you're the Giga Sushi fan, that's when I put in some of the more off the wall things like uni, which is a sea urchin that they kind of crack open and then they kind of scoop out the inside, and it has like this orange look to it. So I'd put uni, definitely. It's very, very niche. You either love it or you hate it. There's not really anybody I've ever met that's in the middle. Me personally, it's okay. I can stand it, but I'm not going to go ever out of my way to order it. I would put the salmon roe, where it's just literally salmon eggs on top of rice and seaweed, and the seaweed almost acts as if it's a bowl holding all the eggs in. Tried it once, didn't really like the popping in the mouth when you're eating it. And then the last one that I put on here was something I've only tried a few times, and once again, acquired taste. I don't understand why people go out of their way, but it is known as the foie gras of the sea. It's monkfish liver. And if you've ever seen a monkfish, one of the most hideous creatures of all time. So I'd say a monkfish liver tastes how a monkfish actually looks. Anyway, that is my kind of ranking of noob, mid, advanced, and Giga Chad sushi fans. That's kind of the order I think you should follow. That's just me personally. I'm sure other people have different takes on it. But we're talking all about the sushi this, sushi that. But what is sushi? Everybody kind of thinks, I think sushi more or less is an umbrella term, and really it's, fish, meat, eggs, like roe, like actual fish eggs, vegetables, any of those toppings with rice, sometimes with seaweed. Kind of think of sushi more or less as an umbrella term. But within the world of sushi, there's specific types of sushi. I'm going to break those down really quick. So we have what is called Nagiri Sushi, which is when you think of a traditional piece of sushi, that is really what you're thinking is nigiri. It's a small bite size, thinly sliced piece of fish over a little ball of rice. And sometimes there can be sauces added to it. There can be toppings like, very thinly sliced green onions. They can have potentially a little bit of wasabi in there. So when you think of sushi, and you think normally it comes in pieces of 2, or if you ordered more, of course you can have more, but typically it comes either 1 or 2 pieces. So that's nigiri. The next is sashimi. And sashimi really is the raw fish or shellfish with no rice. So this would be like if you wanted to order ahi tuna or salmon or albacore crab, that uni, you can get that as sashimi. So think of sashimi as no rice. And then the next would be maki, which is your standard kind of cut roll. So it's like your regular sushi roll. It's rice. It's whatever the filling might be, all wrapped in a piece of seaweed, which is really easy to pick it up with your chopsticks and dip into whatever sauces you might have. And then the next would be uramaki, which is similar to maki, but it's much more extravagant. There's sauces and there's toppings. So, in California, one of the things growing up for me is I would always see people get these incredibly lavish rolls. So it would be like the Dynamite Dragon Thunder roll, and it's all different types of fish all wrapped up. And then they would put everything from tempura flakes to fried garlic to eel sauce, spicy mayo, all of these different toppings. And it's really extravagant. It's really over the top. It's very much a California invention, I'd think, because it's not something where you're going to roll into a traditional Japanese sushi restaurant and order the avocado with Dynamite Thunder roll. Like, that's not really going to be a thing. So that's uramaki. And then we have tamaki, which is your hand roll. So if you think about a hand roll, it's almost like an ice cream cone, but instead of a cone, it's seaweed, rice inside, and then think of like the ice cream would actually be the fish or whatever you're going to be ordering in it. Really, really big fan, I have to say. A spicy scallop hand roll is one of my all-time delights for me personally. So now that we kind of know what are the different types of sushi, I do want to talk a little bit about the history of sushi, kind of where it came from. Because I've never really thought about where sushi came from. I've always just really thought, okay, it must be something that's been around for thousands of years. It comes from Japan. Probably recently in the last 40, 50 years, it made its way over to the US and eventually spread through the world. But really, where did it come from? And what was interesting is I couldn't find any definitive dates or real times. And there's not really even a location that kind of holds that clear and concise like moment that sushi was created. So it's kind of shrouded in this folklore. But one of the things that we do know is that there was a Chinese dictionary from the 4th century detailing salted fish being put in between cooked rice, causing the fish to ferment and allowing that fish to stay edible for longer. So most likely, from what we do know historically, is that sushi was introduced into Japan in the 9th century, as at the same time Buddhism was very much spreading throughout Japan. And due to the Buddhist dietary restrictions around eating certain types of meat, a lot of these Japanese people who were Buddhist would then turn to fish as the focus of many of their meals. And of course, the geography of Japan is not hurting it in any way. As you know, when you think about Japan, it really is just a chain of islands. There's nowhere that you're going to be in Japan that is going to be so far away from the ocean. It's not like you're in Nebraska trying to get somewhere to the ocean to go get some fresh fish, right? So luckily, I think since they had that island chain there, that really helped the popularity of sushi over time. And the Japanese are given credit for preparing sushi really as a complete meal by combining the fermented fish and the rice together. Now, this very first sushi was known as Nagiri or aged sushi. So that's really what we think about when you think about the original types of sushi. And even the very first type of Nagiri on record is called Funazushi, which originated over 1,000 years ago around Lake Biwa, which is Japan's largest freshwater lake. And the fish that they would take out of Lake Biwa are these golden carp. And then they would take the carp and pack it inside of this salted rice and then wrap it up and compress it and put weights on top of it. So that way it would get all of the moisture out and expedite that fermentation process. But even so, it still took a good 6 months before that fish was ready to be eaten. And, you know, due to the time involved, it was very much perceived as a delicacy. And adding that, it just was only given to really the upper crust group of people, the wealthiest of the wealthies. Those were the only people that could actually enjoy this delicacy. And one of the things that they did realize is once the 1400s hits, is the more weight that you put into the compression of this funazushi, the quicker the process is. So instead of waiting 6 months for this fish to be edible and be fermented properly, it now goes down to 1 month. But then at the same time, they realized that even adding that more weight in 1 month, the fish didn't have to totally be fermented to really still taste danky and delicious. So with this new shorter fermentation period, now they called it Mama Nagiri, which is raw Nagiri, or raw aged fish, which is a little bit interesting. And then we come to the 1600s, and in the early 1600s, ushers in what's called the Edo period in Japan, which the Edo period, they moved the capital from Kyoto to Edo, which is now Tokyo. But the Edo period from the early 1600s to about the 1860s, what that ushered in was more stable political climates, faster growing economies. Because of that, these city centers really blew up and they started to boom. And with all of these advancements, you guessed it, sushi advancements also occurred. So there was a totally new fermentation process. Instead of even having to wait a month, how about we only have to wait a handful of hours? because instead of taking the salted rice and compressing it, they started using rice vinegar to aid in the fermentation of the fish. And now this just means that sushi could be ready instead of 6 months to 1 month to days, weeks. How about hours? And now there's a gentleman that comes along by the name of Hanaya Yohei, who is very much known today as the inventor of Nagiri style sushi. And that's going to be a fresh piece of fish, not fermented, put together with a small amount of vinegared rice. And he opened up the very first sushi stall in 1824. And when he was serving the public, it created a massive demand. However, he chose his location wisely to open up his stall. It wasn't just in some corner in the back alley. He actually found one of the few bridges that crossed the Sumida River, which is a massive river. So that way, as people are coming and going, people doing trade, people heading to another side of the city, going back and forth from all different areas coming into Tokyo in order to do business and do travel and do trade, he was able to sell them his type of sushi. And because of this, these people would come in and they would eat the sushi. And if they stayed there for long enough, they would obviously want more and go back to his stall. Or if they were heading out of town, then they would taste it and they would go back to where they're from and they would speak about this amazing thing called sushi. This great fresh fish with this amazing vinegared rice and the taste and how good it all was. So very smart by opening up that location. And due to the convenience, the speed of his process, this nigiri style sushi exploded in popularity. And now, so that was what, 1824, 1825, let's say. So now by 1923, almost 100 years later, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of sushi carts all around Edo, which was now known as Tokyo. And these carts, they called them, let's see if I can do this, yatai. I believe it's yatai. If I said that wrong, I'm so sorry. But they were found all over. And then, unfortunately, in 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake struck Tokyo. And because of that, there was a mass amount of buildings that fell over, a lot of devastation, a lot of lives lost. It's very unfortunate when a big earthquake strikes ever. But you can imagine the level of buildings that were there in 1923, different coatings, all of these things, and the material, just strictly the material they're made out of, they're not going to be as sturdy as if you have some of the engineers that we have today building these buildings. And even now, whenever we see, there was just a really gnarly earthquake up in Sendai in Tokyo not 3 months ago, and you see that level of devastation. So you can imagine what it's like in 1923. And what happened here was really interesting because, we can think about all of the negativity around what could have occurred there, but really, there was a lot of good that came from it in the world of sushi. Because the land prices, when everything was destroyed, the land prices decreased so significantly. So all of these sushi merchants that previously just had these little carts that they would push around, if they had the means to stay in Tokyo, in the city, they would just buy up an incredibly inexpensive piece of property. They would then fix it up, and they would open up their own dine-in, sit-down sushi restaurant. But then also you have to keep in mind there were a lot of people that couldn't remain in Tokyo because they just didn't have the means, so they would head back to their hometowns. And while heading back to their hometown, they would also take word of this delicious meal called sushi. So that really aided in the spread of sushi all through Japan. And in fact, not too long after that earthquake happened, was it much more common, if not almost impossible, to find an actual sushi cart because it was everything was indoor dining at that point. So that's just when they took the idea of sushi, made it to a sit down. It went from a little stall to an actual sit down, full on meal. And once that happened, once again, incredibly popular. Eventually in the 1960s or so in LA, California, where I'm from, right outside of the little kind of Japanese hub area like Little Tokyo, they had opened one of the very first sushi restaurants, and that became incredibly popular. And with that, it just grew, spread like wildfire throughout California. No pun intended. Anyways, now we have sushi all over the world, and there's very few places that you can go to where they might not have tons of sushi restaurants, but everybody knows what sushi is at this point. And I've only met a handful of people that have never tried sushi, and most of them is just because they're a little bit intimidated. It's not that they've never had the opportunity. So it's there. It's kind of the history of sushi. And there's a lot to it, and I want to get into a little bit of what is kind of sushi etiquette. But I think before we go into the etiquette portion, I think there is something that we need to talk about with sushi, and that is the kind of side items, if you will. You have your soy sauce, wasabi, ginger. What are these all about? What is going on here? So soy sauce is soy sauce. It is going to be a sodium-heavy, fermented dipping sauce. You can have a little bit on the side with your sushi, and you can kind of dip it in and enjoy it if you like the flavor. Me, personally, I'm not a really big fan of soy sauce. I never have been. I just don't really think it adds much. I would much rather have the flavors of the fish and the different type of dressed rice and that vinegared rice much better. But wasabi is something that's interesting, and I have only one time in my entire life had real wasabi. So wasabi is a root plant and very familiar if you know sushi. In fact, the root plant of wasabi, that family also includes horseradish and mustard. Most people don't know that. But wasabi does go by the name of Japanese horseradish because it has that almost like spicy. When you have a little bit too much very quickly, or all of your sinus is going to be clear just because of the power of it. And for the most part, used in Japanese cuisine is the actual stem of the wasabi plant, even though in a handful of other dishes they can use the leaves. The stem is really what is the most potent. So it's going to be either grated very finely, almost into a paste, or they dry it and turn it into a powder, which can then stay for longer. As soon as you have that sushi paste, the wasabi paste, it almost immediately, within minutes of it being ground, is going to start to lose that potency. So it's very, very important that you have that wasabi root with your sushi when it's going to be very fresh right there in the moment. But most restaurants that serve sushi in the United States, they don't use real wasabi because of how difficult it is to transport. It's a very temperamental stem where it has to remain in a cool, dark place between 40 to 70 degrees at all times. As soon as you start to break those parameters, it starts to go bad. It needs constantly refreshing new water kind of running over it. And that's actually where you would find wasabi plants most of the time they're grown. You're going to notice that they're almost planted as if they're inside of a river because there's always this fresh water that's rolling over it. If you were to take one of those roots and just drop it into a vat of water and hopefully transport it to across the world, down the street, whatever, it's not going to be as good. And the longer it doesn't have that fresh water and stay in that cool, dark temperature, very climate controlled, is as soon as it starts to lose its potency. But one of the whole points of eating wasabi is that potence level. So if you've ever actually had real wasabi, the taste difference from kind of like that green tubed paste that you get at most places is like night and day. And once again, as soon as you have a little bit of that, your throat and your nose and you just clear up immediately just because of how it is. You just get this really deep, fresh breath of air and you're like, oh man, okay, I'm cleared out. Now let's go ahead and let's enjoy the meal. But if you're ever going to put wasabi on your sushi, if you so desire, typically I would say don't do that, because if you're at a reputable sushi establishment, the gentleman that's making your sushi, if he is intending for that to have any level of wasabi, he's actually going to put a little dab right under the fish, in between the fish and the rice. So typically, if it's not already there, I won't have it. But one thing to avoid, and actually I'm going to hang off on this one because this is going to be a part of the etiquette portion that we're doing next. But the next thing I want to talk about is ginger. So when you go and you have a sushi meal, they're going to give you wasabi and ginger as well. And I've had friends go in and just go to town and just house all of their ginger right away. And I'm saying, like, what the heck are you doing? One, personally, I don't think it tastes that good. And two, that is not what ginger is designed for in a sushi meal. What it's really designed for is in between your pieces of sushi, you're supposed to have one piece of this very thinly cut pickled ginger in order to cleanse your palate. So that way you can taste the nuances of the next piece of sushi that you are going to be eating. So you don't want to sit there and you want to eat all of that right away. It cleanses your palate of any of those lingering tastes. You can really, really enjoy it. But a much lesser known use for that ginger is if you do want soy sauce, but you don't want to dip your sushi in soy sauce, you can pick up a couple pieces of that ginger with your chopsticks and dip them in the soy sauce. And then use that almost as a brush to brush the top of the fish with your soy, and then you can eat it and enjoy. So that's kind of what's up with wasabi, with ginger. We've gone through the sushi. I want to talk about some etiquette, though, before we're out of here, because I do think that it is very important to have proper etiquette when eating sushi. I want to start with the chopsticks. And one thing I do have to say, it is okay to eat nigiri sushi with your hands. You don't need chopsticks to do that. It is totally okay. Of course, wash your hands before your meal, ya sicko. But it's okay to actually get a really good piece of nigiri sushi and pick it up with your hand and plop it in your mouth and enjoy. Now, if you're eating sashimi, once again, sashimi is the fish with no rice. That is a chopsticks only affair. You don't want to be picking up the fish with your hands. Very, very disrespectful. And another thing is when you're using your chopsticks, if you have a bowl, let's say you have a bowl of rice or anything, you never want to take your chopsticks and just jam them into the top so that way they're pointing upwards, because that can be very disrespectful, not only to the purveyors of your fine sushi, the establishment itself, but it's actually very much as a faux pas, because when you put those chopsticks directly up and down as if they're pointing towards the sky, that resembles a shrine to past loved ones, and it's disrespectful to the spirits. So don't do that. And another thing, I got to point this out. Don't ever go and get your pieces of chopstick, and as soon as you break them, start kind of wiping them together and doing to get all little pieces and chunks of whatever bamboo might be on there. Don't do that. Just if you see something, just kind of nice and peel it. It would be the same as if you go to a very fine steakhouse and you get your steak knife and your fork and you start like kind of tinging them together. It's rude. Don't do that. Please have some respect. Chopsticks. Now, when you're eating sushi at a nice establishment, what you want to do is you want to eat the piece of sushi right away that the sushi chef hands you. So as soon as he puts it in front of you, you don't want to sit and wait and talk with your friends and take pictures and chit and chat and let it linger for very long. A few seconds is okay, but really you want to pick that up and eat it right away. Because when you're really having a high quality meal of sushi, you have to keep in mind that the people that are creating these dishes for you have trained years upon years upon years to be in their position of expertise. You know, you hear these stories where when somebody starts as an apprentice sushi maker, they have to wash the rice for 5 years before they'll even allow them to pick up a knife, right? So these people are really dedicating thousands of hours to perfecting their craft. And that means when you're at a really good professional sushi establishment, the person that's making your sushi knows exactly the moment when to take the fish out, exactly when to cut it, exactly how thick, exactly perfectly create this so they know when is the right time to eat it, where the fish is not going to be too cold, it's not going to be too warm, room temperature, it's going to be perfect. So you don't want to let it just sit there for 5 minutes or so. Very disrespectful. And also, you have to eat it in one bite. If you're going to go get nagiri sushi, you don't want to actually break the sushi. You don't want to have 2-3 bites, because then it's going to actually have almost like the integrity of the build of the sushi is going to be broken, because then the rice is going to start to fall apart and the fish is going to fall apart. And you also don't want to, when you're eating sushi, don't take the fish off of the rice and eat them separately. If you're going to do that, just order sashimi. Every sushi place you go to will have sashimi as well as sushi, as nigiri. So please don't do that. One bite, keep it all in one, eat it right away, all good. Next thing is when it comes to the soy sauce and the ginger and the wasabi, I know we talked about it, but don't douse your sushi pieces in soy sauce. There's a really good scene from a show called, I believe it was called Billions, where it's a few of these kind of highfalutin financiers. They're out at dinner and they're trying to respectfully enjoy this beautiful sushi dinner that they're having. And they look over to the end of the bar and there's some young guy who probably is like some, young buck at the firm next door. And he's taking this piece of sushi and he's not only like he's wrapping it in the ginger and dunking it in a bath of soy sauce. And it really is like, it almost hurts my heart to see. And then the guy who's actually having the meal turns over and he looks at him and he starts cursing him out and screams and yells and says, you need to have some goddamn respect. This man has put more time into preparing that piece of fish than you will ever do in anything in your entire life. So enjoy it for what it is. And that's always kind of stuck with me. So the rules are very simple. If you must have soy sauce, some people really, really love soy sauce. If you must have soy sauce and you're having nagiri sushi, pick it up with your hand, turn it either upside down or on its side, and just dip a little piece of the fish inside the soy sauce. You don't dunk it. You try not to get the actual rice because then the rice will fall apart. The sticky rice will fall apart. So if you must dip, just the edge, and just like we learned in Seinfeld, you never double dip the chip. And in this case, you never double dip the sushi, okay? And if you're going to put wasabi on this, what you want to do is evenly coat the wasabi over the fish. So that way you're not having chunks of, when it's really spicy and really hot, it's kind of like a nice even coating. And one of the things that I learned one of my first times ever at sushi, and I remember very specifically was shown to me that you take soy sauce, put it in a little ramekin, and then you start to take pieces of the wasabi and drop it in and you stir it up and make this like soy/wasabi paste. Don't do that. How about just cut it out? Think about doing it and then do the opposite of that. Don't do that. Not only is it going to ruin your sushi, it's going to make an absolute mess of where you're sitting. And talk about disrespectful. Don't do that. Okay. Like I said, cut it out. Those are the pet peeves here. But when it comes to drinking at a sushi meal, I know traditionally you wouldn't have sake when you're having sushi itself because it's like a rice wine and then there's also rice in the sushi, so it's a little bit redundant. But you can have beer. If you order your beer, obviously you go to everybody at the table that has a drink, you say, hey, kanpai, and you enjoy. If you are going to drink sake, the kind of rule is you don't pour your own sake. You allow somebody else to pour it for you, and then you can return the pour to them as a show of respect. And then, if everybody respects each other enough, then everybody takes their drink of sake and, hey, enjoy. It's also okay, if you're enjoying your meal and you're having some drinks, to buy the sushi chef their own drink. If you want to buy them a beer, if you want to give them a shot of your own sake, it's a show of respect. You're allowed to do that. And oftentimes, then they're going to kind of go around and come by with everybody, and everybody gets to enjoy a drink, and you have a good old time. That's a lot of information. It's a lot of sushi talk. I'm just as hungry now as I was when I started recording this, but I am going to go probably on the hunt tonight to find some sushi to eat. And I hope you had a great time learning a little bit more about sushi and some of my honest feelings about it. As much as I absolutely love it, I get a little bit heated when people don't respect it as it should be. But I hope you had a great time with me. I had tons of fun with you here, talking about sushi, learning about sushi, salivating over sushi. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will certainly see you next time on the ISWUTT Podcast. Thank you very much. Michael Graham out.